It was a perfect summer afternoon. The sky was clear. The gentle sound of the lake's waves brushing against the shore filled the air, and the excitement of friends setting up their tents promised an unforgettable weekend. Liam was focused on adjusting the ropes of his tent, yet there was an unshakable feeling in his chest, like something significant was about to happen. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it lingered in the air. Out of nowhere, a voice called from behind him. "Liam?" He turned, his heart skipping a beat when he saw a familiar face, one he hadn't seen in years. It was Ethan, his childhood best friend. For a moment, Liam froze, his mind struggling to reconcile the boy he remembered with the man standing in front of him. "Oh my God, Ethan!" Liam exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. The embrace was filled with warmth and nostalgia, as if no time had passed at all. Though the years had separated them, the connection they'd shared was undeniable, reigniting as if it had never been extinguished. Ethan's wide grin lit up his face like the sun sinking into the horizon. The two quickly fell into conversation, reminiscing about their youth. They laughed about the adventures they used to have, climbing trees, swimming in creeks, and dreaming of what their futures might hold. Yet as they talked, Liam couldn't help but notice how much Ethan had changed. His athletic build and the confident demeanor were captivating, and Liam felt a flutter in his chest he couldn't ignore. Ethan noticed it too. His eyes lingered on Liam's features a little longer than necessary, his smile softening with each glance. It wasn't just the rekindling of an old friendship. There was something unspoken between them, a tension that neither could quite articulate. It hovered in the space between their words, electric and alive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the lake's edge came alive with campfires. Laughter echoed through the trees, but Liam and Ethan were too engrossed in each other to notice. The world around them seemed to fade as they reconnected, their bond growing stronger with every passing moment. The night had only just begun, but the spark between them felt inevitable. The night settled in with a cool breeze, carrying the sounds of laughter and the occasional burst of music from nearby tents. The campfires burned brightly, their flickering light reflecting in the calm waters of the lake. Liam and Ethan sat side by side on a log near the fire, their conversation flowing as naturally as it had in their youth. Ethan chuckled, recounting a memory that had Liam grinning ear to ear. "Do you remember when we tried to sneak into Old Man Grayson's orchard and you nearly fell off the wall?" Ethan teased, his eyes sparkling with humor. Liam laughed, shaking his head. "I didn't almost fall. You pushed me." The banter between them felt effortless, and Liam couldn't help but feel a growing warmth whenever Ethan laughed. He noticed the way Ethan's eyes crinkled at the corners, how his voice had deepened over the years, and how his confidence had blossomed. Everything about him seemed magnetic, pulling Liam in without resistance. At one point, their hands brushed accidentally as they reached for a nearby bottle. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through Liam. He glanced at Ethan, who seemed just as affected. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the party around them vanished. Liam's heartbeat quickened, his chest tight with emotions he didn't fully understand. Ethan cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "It's crazy how much has changed, and how much hasn't," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the fire. Liam nodded, unable to trust his voice not to betray the storm of feelings building inside him. He wanted to say something, to acknowledge the energy between them, but the words escaped him. As the night deepened, The campfire's glow seemed to dim in comparison to the intensity of their connection. The conversation grew softer, more personal, as they shared dreams, fears, and secrets they'd never told anyone else. Liam felt vulnerable, but it was a vulnerability he welcomed, because it was with Ethan. By the time the firewood turned to embers, they were sitting closer than before, their shoulders nearly touching. Neither of them wanted the night to end, but neither dared to push further. Yet. The party had begun to wind down. Some people were retreating to their tents, while others lingered by the fires, their laughter softened by the late hour. Ethan leaned closer to Liam, his voice a quiet murmur against the backdrop of the crackling fire. "I have something I want to show you," he said, his tone laced with hesitation. Liam followed Ethan to his tent. Curiosity piqued. Inside, Ethan reached for his wallet and pulled out a small, slightly worn photo. He held it out, his expression unreadable. Liam took it, his breath catching as he recognized the image. It was of the two of them as kids, smiling wide and carefree, arms slung around each other. "You've kept this all these years?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the photo. "It reminded me of who I was and who I wanted to be," he admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I didn't realize how much I missed you until now." Emotion swirled in Liam's chest, a mix of nostalgia, gratitude, and something deeper. He looked up at Ethan, their eyes locking in a moment that felt heavier than any words could carry. Without thinking, Liam stepped closer, the photo still in his hand. "I missed you too," Liam said, his voice steady despite the rapid beat of his heart. Ethan's lips curved into a small smile, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made Liam's pulse race even faster. The air between them felt charged, like the calm before a storm. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, Liam leaned in. Their lips met in a kiss that was both hesitant and electrifying. It was a kiss filled with years of longing and unspoken emotions, a kiss that seemed to rewrite everything they thought they knew about themselves. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The photo slipped from Liam's fingers as Ethan pulled him closer, deepening the kiss. The walls of the tent seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them in a world of their own making. The kiss lingered, deepening with every passing second as the world outside faded into oblivion. For Liam and Ethan, this was a moment they had unknowingly been waiting for, a culmination of years apart and feelings they hadn't dared to name. The warmth of Ethan's hands on Liam's waist sent shivers down his spine, and for the first time, Liam let himself surrender completely. Ethan pulled back slightly, his breath warm against Liam's lips. I didn't think this would ever happen," he admitted, his voice unsteady. Liam looked into his eyes, seeing a mixture of uncertainty and desire. "Me neither," Liam whispered, his hand instinctively brushing Ethan's cheek. "But it feels right." They sat together on the small mattress inside the tent, the photo forgotten on the floor. Their closeness felt natural, as if this was where they were always meant to be. Ethan reached for Liam's hand, intertwining their fingers as if to reassure himself that this moment was real. "I don't know what this means," Ethan murmured, his voice tinged with vulnerability, "but I don't want it to stop." Liam nodded, unable to find the words to express the storm of emotions inside him. Instead, he leaned in again, his lips brushing against Ethan's in a kiss that was softer, slower, but no less intense. Time seemed to stretch as they explored this newfound connection, their touches growing more confident, their barriers falling away. Outside, the party continued, but neither of them cared. The muffled laughter and music were mere background noise to the symphony playing in their hearts. Ethan pulled Liam closer, his arms wrapping around him in a way that felt both protective and freeing. For the first time, they weren't just friends reconnecting. They were something more. As the night deepened, their kisses turned into whispers, their whispers into laughter, and their laughter into a quiet, shared understanding. They stayed wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside their tent a distant memory. It wasn't just the alcohol. It was something deeper, something they couldn't ignore. When they finally drifted off to sleep, their bodies tangled together, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that his life had changed forever. This was more than a moment. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the thin fabric of the tent, illuminating the space with a soft golden glow. Liam stirred, his head resting against Ethan's chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat a soothing melody. For a moment, he stayed still, savoring the warmth and the quiet intimacy of the moment. As reality began to set in, a wave of panic crept over him. He had never been in a situation like this before, and the thought of facing the world outside the tent made his stomach churn. He glanced up at Ethan, who was still asleep, his expression peaceful. Liam couldn't help but smile. Even in his panic, he couldn't deny the overwhelming sense of rightness he felt being there. Ethan stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw Liam, a slow, lazy smile spread across his face. "Morning," he said, his voice husky with sleep. Liam's heart skipped a beat at the sound. "Morning," he replied softly, his cheeks flushing. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of the previous night hanging in the air. But their peace was short-lived. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped them out of their bubble. Before they could react, the zipper of the tent was yanked open, and Chris, one of their friends, stood there, his jaw dropping at the sight of them tangled together. "What the hell?" Chris exclaimed, his voice loud enough to draw attention from the nearby tents. Ethan scrambled to sit up, his face pale with shock. Liam's heart raced as the reality of their situation came crashing down. The commotion outside grew louder as more people gathered, their whispers and gasps adding to the chaos. Liam felt like he couldn't breathe. He couldn't face the stares, the questions, the judgment. Without thinking, he pushed past Chris and bolted from the tent, ignoring Ethan's calls for him to stop. The world around him blurred as he ran, his only thought being to escape. Ethan tried to follow, but the crowd around the tent blocked his way. "Liam, wait!" he shouted, his voice desperate. But Liam was already gone, disappearing into the woods that surrounded the campsite. Liam ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, the echoes of Chris's voice and the stares of their friends haunting him. He couldn't get the image of their shocked faces out of his mind. The weight of their judgment felt unbearable, crushing him with every step. He couldn't let them see him like this, vulnerable and exposed. The woods gave way to a narrow road, and Liam slowed to a stop, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. His mind raced with a million thoughts, each one more overwhelming than the last. How could he face Ethan now? How could he face anyone? He leaned against a tree, his head in his hands, tears streaming down his face. Behind him, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Ethan had managed to catch up, his own breath ragged from running. "Liam! Stop!" he called, his voice filled with concern. Liam turned, his expression a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "Why did you follow me?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Because I care about you," Ethan said, stepping closer. "I don't care what they think, Liam. What happened between us, what we have, it's real. Don't let their opinions ruin this." Ethan's words were earnest, his eyes pleading. But Liam shook his head, the fear and shame too strong to ignore. Before Ethan could say anything else, the sound of a car approaching broke through the tension. Liam stepped back onto the road without thinking, his mind too clouded to notice the headlights bearing down on him. Ethan's shout was the last thing he heard before everything went dark. When Liam opened his eyes, the blinding fluorescent lights of the hospital room greeted him. His body ached everywhere, and his head throbbed with a dull pain that made it hard to focus. For a moment, he couldn't remember what had happened, but then it all came rushing back. The campfire, the tent, the kiss, the crowd, and the car. He let out a shaky breath as tears welled in his eyes. The door to his room opened, and Ethan stepped inside, his face pale and etched with worry. "Liam," he said softly, relief washing over him as their eyes met. He rushed to Liam's side, hesitating for a moment before reaching out to hold his hand. Liam didn't pull away. "Ethan, Liam started, but Ethan shook his head, cutting him off. Don't apologize, Liam. None of this is your fault." Ethan's voice was steady, but his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was so scared I'd lose you." Liam's throat tightened at the raw emotion in Ethan's voice. He wanted to say something, anything to reassure him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he squeezed Ethan's hand, the gesture saying what he couldn't. Ethan sat down in the chair beside the bed, his hand never leaving Liam's. "I don't care what anyone thinks," Ethan said after a long silence. "Let them talk. Let them judge. What matters is us. What we have." His voice broke slightly, but he held Liam's gaze, his determination clear. "You mean too much to me to let this go?" Liam's tears spilled over, and he turned his head away, ashamed of how weak he felt. "I don't know if I can do this, Ethan," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to be this person." Ethan leaned closer, his grip on Liam's hand tightening. "Then let me show you. Let's figure it out together. You don't have to do it alone." His words were a lifeline, pulling Liam out of the darkness he'd been drowning in. For the first time, Liam allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be okay. The days in the hospital passed slowly. Liam's injuries were severe, but not life-threatening, giving him time to recover physically. Emotionally, however, he was still fragile. Ethan visited every day, never leaving his side for long. His presence was a comfort Liam hadn't realized he needed. On the third day, Chris showed up at the hospital looking guilty and sheepish. Liam tensed at the sight of him, memories of the tent and the crowd flooding back. But Chris raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice low. I wanted to apologize." Liam stared at him, unsure of what to say. Chris shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "What I did back there, it was wrong. I shouldn't have reacted like that. I was just surprised, you know? But it's not my place to judge." His words were halting, but they carried a sincerity that Liam couldn't ignore. Ethan stepped in, his tone firm but calm. "You embarrassed him, Chris. You humiliated him in front of everyone." Chris nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I know. And I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to make it right." Liam took a deep breath, his hands clenched in his lap. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice quiet. "But it's going to take time. I'm still figuring things out." Chris nodded again, his expression somber. "Take all the time you need," he said before leaving. After he was gone, Ethan turned to Liam, his expression soft. "That was brave," he said. Liam shook his head, tears prickling his eyes. "I don't feel brave, I feel broken." Ethan sat beside him, taking his hand once more. "You're not broken, Liam. You're just beginning to heal." As Liam's recovery progressed, the bond between him and Ethan grew unshakable. Every visit Ethan made to the hospital became a sanctuary from the storm of emotions Liam was grappling with. They spent hours talking, delving into their shared past, their dreams and fears they had never spoken aloud. With Ethan by his side, Liam began to feel a sense of stability, even in the wake of the accident and the humiliation that haunted him. But the world outside the hospital was relentless. News of what had happened at the campsite had spread like wildfire among their circle of friends, and whispers of judgment had reached Liam even within the hospital walls. Each passing day, he wrestled with the fear of being defined by one night, one kiss, and the vulnerability that followed. "Why does it feel like my whole life has changed because of one moment?" Liam asked one evening, his voice heavy with frustration and shame. Ethan sat beside him, his gaze unwavering. "Because it has," Ethan replied gently. "But that's not a bad thing, Liam. Sometimes change is exactly what we need." Liam looked at Ethan, searching for reassurance. "What if I can't handle it? What if I'm not strong enough to face them?" Ethan reached out, taking Liam's hand in his. "Then we face it together. Their opinions don't matter, Liam. What matters is us, what we have." But the fear lingered, a shadow that refused to lift. Liam had spent years hiding parts of himself, fitting into the expectations of others. Letting go of that facade felt like stepping into an unknown abyss. "I've never done this before," Liam admitted, his voice trembling. "I don't even know who I am without the walls I've built." Ethan's voice softened, his grip on Liam's hand tightening. "You're Liam. The same Liam who climbed trees with me as a kid, who always dreamed bigger than anyone else, who made me laugh when I needed it most. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just trust yourself and trust me." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Chris, standing awkwardly in the hallway, his expression a mix of guilt and uncertainty. Liam tensed, the memories of the campsite flooding back. But before he could speak, Chris raised his hands. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," he began, his voice low. "I shouldn't have reacted the way I did. It was wrong, and I know I hurt you." Liam hesitated, his emotions swirling in a chaotic mix of anger and forgiveness. Ethan stepped forward, his tone firm. "You humiliated him, Chris. Do you understand what that did to him?" Chris nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I do, and I regret it. I don't expect you to forgive me, Liam, but I needed to say this." Liam took a deep breath, his hands trembling. "Thank you for saying that," he said finally. "But it's going to take time." Chris nodded again, his shoulders slumping in acceptance. "Take all the time you need," he said before leaving. After the door closed, Ethan turned to Liam, his expression soft. "That was brave," he said. Liam shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I don't feel brave. I feel lost." Ethan wrapped his arms around Liam, pulling him into a comforting embrace. "You're not lost, Liam. You're just finding your way. That night, As Ethan held him, Liam allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find strength in the love they shared. The day Liam was discharged from the hospital was bittersweet. Physically, he was healing well, but emotionally, he still carried the scars of everything that had happened. Ethan was there to help him pack his things, his presence a steady anchor in the midst of Liam's turmoil. As they drove to Liam's house, the silence between them was thick with unspoken emotions. Liam stared out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by. "Do you think it'll ever get easier?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced at him, his expression thoughtful. "I think it already has. You just don't realize it yet." That evening, they sat together in Liam's living room, the glow of the setting sun casting warm light across the room. Ethan reached out, taking Liam's hand in his. "I need to tell you something," he said, his tone serious. Liam turned to him, his heart pounding. "What is it?" "I love you," Ethan said simply, the words hanging in the air between them. Liam's breath caught, his chest tightening with a mix of fear and elation. He'd never heard those words directed at him before, and the sincerity in Ethan's voice took his breath away. Liam looked down at their joined hands, his mind racing. He'd spent so much of his life hiding, running from who he was. But Ethan had seen him, truly seen him, and had stayed by his side through everything. I love you too," Liam finally said, his voice trembling. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but instead of falling, he felt himself soar. Ethan smiled, his relief evident. He pulled Liam into a tight embrace, their hearts beating in sync. "We'll figure this out together," Ethan said softly, his voice steady with determination. "No matter what happens, I'm here. Always." In the weeks that followed, Liam began to rebuild his life. With Ethan's support, he faced their friends, addressing the rumors and judgments with a newfound confidence. Some friendships were lost, but others grew stronger, built on acceptance and understanding. Liam realized that while the world might never fully understand, he didn't need everyone's approval. He only needed Ethan's. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were arguments, doubts, and moments of fear. But through it all, they held on to each other, their love a constant in the chaos. Liam began to see himself through Ethan's eyes, learning to embrace the parts of himself he'd once tried to hide. One evening, as they sat by the lake where it all began, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo of them as kids. "I think it's time we make some new memories," he said, handing the photo to Liam. Liam smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. "I think so too." As they sat together, the world around them faded into the background. Their journey was far from over, but they knew one thing for certain. Their love was worth every challenge, every tear, and every moment of joy. It was a love that would endure, a love that had changed them both forever. And as Liam looked at Ethan, he knew he'd found something truly eternal. Thank you for watching our video. We'd love to hear your thoughts. On a scale of 1 to 10, what rating would you give this story? Drop your answer in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next amazing stories. See you next time.